Asking for It, A Novel Approach, Episode 23, Chapter 93. Looking every bit the couple $1,000 he's just spent, Lance is wearing his bike-ready ensemble of new street clothes. A dab green waxed cotton jacket, dark brown pair of heavy chinos, and a pair of something suspiciously like Bluntstones that cost almost 3 times as much. The off-rodeo boutique was glad to package up the spare pair of chinos he's chosen, in charcoal, along with his techie leathered riding suit, gloves, and bike boots. They'll have it all UPS'd over to his hotel. Back on the street, and feeling much less conspicuous, he begins to call Ruth Ann Danzig back. Then he thinks better of it. He'll just ride down to Santa Monica, to the water, and call from somewhere in Venice. He plucks his little half-shell from the Norton's handlebar, straps it on, and starts up the bike. Traffic is a steady midday crawl that Lance gleefully weaves through without difficulty. 20 minutes later, he's parked effortlessly within sight of the boardwalk on Venice Beach. Try that with 4 wheels. He sits under a palm on the worn, smooth half-wall separating boardwalk from beach. Why hasn't he been riding all these years? Behind him, the ocean is doing good things to his state of mind. None of the more inane distractions around him register at all. The drugs and alcohol, the grifters and jugglers and strummers of ukuleles. The whole freak show hubbub of Venice Beach blends into a mobile tableau. For Lance, it's all tinged with a pleasant nostalgia. And somewhere, a stone's throw from here perhaps, Ruth Ann Danzig has returned to the roost. Like she and Lance, 3/4 of their crowd had not been native Angelinos. They were transplants to the city, to California in general. But school and the whole formative years package made L.A. home for them all. A sunny, urban sandbox for creative, almost grown-ups to call their own. He's fishing for his iPhone in the breast pocket of his new jacket. It buzzes just as he's pulling it out to call Ruth Ann. "I'm sorry. I know you said you'd call back, but I couldn't wait. Manfred left early in the morning, and he doesn't have his phone. Frankly, I'm worried. He's not even steady on his feet yet." She seems genuinely anxious. "You're trying to contact him as well, so I thought..." Of course. Are you in Venice? I'm down by the water right now." "Oh, I'm in the canals. So you'd help me find him then?" "I will. I'll be happy to." "Oh, that's fantastic. Can we meet at Il Baccio? Do you know it?" "I don't know it, but my phone will. I really need another dose of caffeine to do this." "How long do you need?" 10 minutes? It's out on Abbot Kinney. This is so great of you. Thank you." Chapter 94. Lance never really lusted after Ruth Ann Danzig, despite all of her very obvious sensual attributes. Sublimation, a spiritual balm is what she'd represented. Now his mind is finding its way back onto some professor's backyard balcony, ivy-covered pergola over it, 6 languid undergraduates lounging. He's remembering an experience certain of his friends would have called satori. She was feverishly sought by the sun, where the passionate rays merged with her form, a light so white as to blind transfixed Lance. His entire being lifted as if on a coastal breeze. It cheapened the event to consider a recently passed reefer or the empty wine bottles decorating dining room, kitchen, and balcony. He'd opened his mouth to regale her in the leafy interval that followed as the sun completed its overtures and time remained still. Then he was simply smiling away any notion of sullying such a pristine moment with amorous declarations, or worse, some base attempt at cleverness. he tucked the moment's magic away to cherish, proof that he'd felt genuinely religious experience, at least once in his life. How was it that, down the years, he'd so rarely revisited this moment? Traveling the half-dozen blocks from the water back up to Abbot Kinney, Lance hardly casts a glance about him for meekness. Arriving at El Bazio, he spots an e-bike at the curb. She said she'd run over Meekness with one. He just loves the sound of that. He's removing his helmet and gloves when she exits the cafe behind him and stops to sip her long espresso in the sun. Turning to go in, he stops short at sight of her. It is obviously Ruth Ann Danzig. Absurdly little changed from the past. An elegant study in vertical symmetry, her waterfall blonde locks, the long legs sheathed in non-distressed indigo denims, tucked into tall tan leather boots. Conspicuously frozen in place, Lance imagines he's smiling a little too widely as well. She hasn't budged either. Yet she's pure animation, against the static backdrop of the rest of this world. The little glitch in time persists until she seems to recognize him. With her smile, everything whirls back into motion around them. Lance hits the newly moving ground beneath him, running, as it were. He shakes his head, still reveling in a déjà vu, still smiling. Helplessly, he offers up the platitude of her not having changed at all in all those years. The breeze toys with the draping of her long blonde bangs. He's regretting his greeting, but she's already speaking. "Hey, hi, of course, I remember you now." As she's speaking, Lance marvels how time toys with the human form. She's as many years his junior as Meekness is his senior. At 50, he's midway between the decrepit writer and the gloriously preserved woman before him now. Is this his tipping point? The annoyingly voguish concept puts an end to his reverie. Lance's obvious distraction hasn't fazed Ruth Ann Danzig. She smiles vaguely at their surroundings while he gets up to speed. How much time has passed? She seems well on the way to the bottom of her coffee. So strange being back. I'm not really here to find Manfred. You know that, right? Now this gets Lance's attention. Well, not in the flesh, I mean. You know, now I've run into him and all. They each smile at this. I would love to find the writer in him, though. You know, what has he been doing all these years? Apparently, he doesn't take care of himself. I'm not sure he even likes himself that much. I'm sorry, Ruth Ann, but you'll probably see I can't even believe how little he's ended up publishing. I mean, I've watched out for his name, you know. With a swift Google, you get the big picture easily enough. But there really isn't much there, is there? 2 novels. I mean, the first published and the second already in the hopper when we met. A handful of stories in magazines. I mean, he's been hacking for film and TV all this time. I feel this unreasonable inclination to help him get it all together. That's where I come in, I guess. I do have a little experience putting old Humpty together again. Not all so good, I'm afraid. Well, I've been teaching English in universities. Plenty of disgruntled writers for colleagues. Plenty of alcoholism and travestied lives as well. But, well, I feel a little out of my depth back here. Understood. Miami's been my base for a good while now. But I've kept a stake here in La La Land. I'm in entertainment, but I'm no literary agent. My dealings with Manfred have amounted to promoting precisely the hacking you've referred to. Which, of course, is well and fine. I mean, he needs to eat, but can't he do better? Oh, he's probably still got it, I think. I mean, hard to be sure behind all the anger. They've migrated 10 or 12 feet to a wrought iron bench at one side of Il Bazzio's entrance, but neither has sat. They do so now. Rugged, urbane, and casually elegant, they make a Southern California postcard couple, framed against the cafe's big picture window. The pristine moment, frozen under the SoCal sun, extends until it occurs to Lance, somewhat awkwardly, that he hasn't masturbated in the entire week or more since he shucked the DB-90 and fled Florida. Adding to that, the preceding 22 days of bondage, his abstinence, voluntary and otherwise, has stretched to a month. It's the first month in 20 years. It's 20 years since he last saw Ruth Ann. And it's 20 years that a porn habit has steadily displaced his love life. You know, Ruth Ann, good intentions aside, I'm pretty sure the old meekness has to find himself. Chapter 95. You know, sometimes you need to relax and just trust in your parents' generation actually getting some of this. We didn't get to do a lot of gender blending, us. Frankly, we were challenged that way. I mean, a lot of folks are still outright closeted even now. They'd love to try out the lifestyles you're enjoying. Then again, the gradually shrinking majority still have zero interest. They're male or female, and they feel threatened in a world where the attraction of man and woman is no longer a given. What are you going to do? They're heavily invested in the traditional romantic setup. That gender divide makes a lot of things easy. The love story, man-woman, boy meets girl, the old tried and true. You know what to expect. Things stick together as if by magic. They used to call it animal magnetism. How's that for an anachronism? I can imagine it's hard feeling like you're written out of the story. But times are changing. Attitudes, understanding. You guys are changing it. Have fun with that. This is Hollywood, for Christ's sake. Write us a really messed up rom-com. It's only hard for the old folks when it's thrown in our faces cold. Yeah, okay. Said I was gender fluid, not generally retarded. If I was still 16, I'd tear you a new one. But what's the point? Sounds like you mean well. Boy, it's fun teasing old people. The older man is an especially curious beast. Imagine him behind bars at the zoo. Who could be blamed for tossing in a little balled-up tinfoil, just to see if he'll go for it? They are sitting at a big table in the front window at Pearl's on La Cienega. Mina Weingarten has left her thug persona on the shelf this day. She wears a houndstooth vest that only just covers her favored white wife-beater. It's a chic little number, with narrow silk lapels and a gold paisley handkerchief protruding from one breast pocket. Most of her dreads are up, held fast in a big antique silver clasp. She regards Lance through raccoon black mascara, skepticism and amusement vying in her expression. That's what Lance sees. Inside, Mina is feeling a nervous trickle of hope. They stare off askance of each other into the traffic outside Pearl's front window. Lance sinks into a momentary reverie. It begins with a pang of the oppression felt in his own adolescence. Home in North Toronto's suburbs was a prison that inspired hostility. For a year he'd lashed out with everything he had, battering himself against the walls of his comfortable confinement. On the worst days, breath just escaped him, leaving his lungs on a one-way trajectory. Inhaling was like sucking wet cement. Lance comes back to the present with a protracted sigh, which Mina notes, but lets pass without remark. A pebble of apprehension rebounds from the bottom of Gabe Weingarten's empty stomach as he peers across the dining room at Pearl's. The handful of radicchio and arugula leaves he's eaten since breakfast have not fortified him for this. His daughter sits at a large sunlit table, empty but for 2 cups of coffee. In conversation with Lance Abierti, she seems animated, healthy, happy even. Gabe loiters, just shy of the little hostess station, idle iPhone held to an ear in the event anyone should notice him. The door swings open again, and behind him, a big, athletic brunette brushes past with a voluminous sweep of her glossy tresses. On her heels is a guy more his own compact size, though with double the muscle mass. The pair make straight for Abierti's table. A spirited round of greetings transpires. Gabe smiles a second with unreasonable pride at Mina's abstaining from the hugging. Lance spots him at this point and waves him over. At sight of her father, Mina steels herself inwardly, even while attempting to loosen up and prepare for this little audition. An image of her 6th birthday party piñata comes fleetingly to mind. The fat paper pineapple is pristine, hanging there. Backyard childhood sunlight makes the colorful tissue folds sparkle like crystals. Lance does the introductions, hamming it up a little with father and daughter. The suddenly busy dining room is noisy. Lance's cell bleats, a caller with a Florida number he doesn't recognize. They haven't quite gotten into things, so he turns away from the table and strains to hear the caller's voice clearly. He's barely hearing the word before the call is broken off. A text message arrives almost immediately. Little flowers procure little favor. He knows that flowers reference means something to him, but can't puzzle it out on the spot. He's back in the table's conversations faster than he'd like. "Lance Abierti, you're the best." Delivering this surprising statement, Mina Weingarten beams at him, infinitely more woman than the gamine he'd met just 2 days before. The room begins to reek of pheromones. Servers, patrons, his own guests. He's a little overwhelmed. Suddenly, it's like rutting season for the West Coast urban human. My father hasn't addressed me 2 adult words in 2 years. Today, he's gone from baby and princess to asking my opinion of hard candy. Huh, hard candy, huh? Yeah, Hard Candy. Brit director, shot here, released in 2006. Required viewing for all lecherous old man, by the way. Michaela is looking at Lance strangely. If Gabe Weingarten was maturely engaging his daughter in conversation a minute ago, he's giddy now, sharing his interest in vintage cars with the Edge. All we need's a writer now, huh, Lance? Mina snaps shut the suede cover on an iPad, looking at him expectantly. On cue, Ruth Ann Danzig appears, threading her way between the tables, a relatively unrumpled Manfred Meekness in tow. Lance's mind is racing now. He cannot recall inviting them to this meeting. So strangely revelatory, this meeting, already before even having begun. He's far from convinced Weingarten will bite. The father-daughter setup is a double-edged sword, to be sure. And yet, he still likes his hunch. Ruth Ann smiles at him. Meekness follows on, nodding amiably enough to everyone in turn, pushing his horn-rimmed glasses back up his nose, the way Lance remembers him doing from their earliest acquaintance. He gives Lance a brief, conspiratorial look, the likes of which Lance can't recall receiving in all the years since those same bygone days. Gabe and the Edge vie to accommodate Ruth Ann's seating opposite Meekness. Lance's seat is across from Mina by the window. The Edge and Michaela occupy the table's midsection. Gabe Weingarten pulls an additional chair up to the head of the table. Oriented seat out, he straddles it, leaning forward to confront the group with a game expression. The bustle of introductions and exchanges of admiration subside, and Gabe looks to Lance. "So, Lance, you didn't tell me you had the entire cast here. I'm intrigued." "No, you're not. You're appalled. But that's okay, Gabe." Lance feels his mixture of emotions resolve into general enthusiasm. Some subtle shift within him is allowing pieces to fall into place. Some of the pieces he hasn't even considered until now. He shares with Mina a secretly amused grin, then turns to address the rest. "Well, thanks to everyone for making it out here. For anyone unaware, this is Gabe Weingarten, celebrated producer-director of quality films since, well, I wouldn't want to date you, Gabe. Let's just say a quarter hour of this man's time is a boon to us. So, to expedite things, I think I'll defer to our own director to paint you the picture." Gabe's eyebrows shoot up at this. Mina's mirror them, but she recovers quickly enough. A tracery of looks, of relationships formed, forming, and fallen apart, hangs for an instant in the air about the table. "Well, let's just call me Ideas Gal for now. Miss Devious to my friends. I am a graduate cum laude of the Hollywood School of Film Brats, but forget about me, and listen to a tale of two hearts twisted, of the mad and the bad men who would exploit them. I know your time is valuable, Mr. Weingarten, but please indulge me in a little slow pitch." The waitress has come and gone again. A lull establishes itself between Pearl's lunch and dinner crowds. As Mina launches into her Unreal TV pitch, Lance tugs a wide blind down to mute the advancing afternoon sun's effect on their table. UTV has a real new wave potential, and I'm not playing here. I'm talking Godard on ayahuasca where it comes to the psychology stuff. What he did to film narrative, I'd like to do with our characters' emotional lives. None of them can make up their minds anyway, so we'll mix up a love life salad, adults gone adolescent kind of stuff. This was not the crisp 30-second sell that Mina had rehearsed. Thankfully, she started out with that slow pitch remark. The Edge is looking into his lap, wearing a faint smile of resignation. Michaela looks engrossed and perplexed by turns. Gabe Weingarten turns to Lance. "So, we're not talking about film here? TV, serial?" Lance indicates Mina with both hands, saying nothing. It's unfortunate she's gone astray of her through line, but if she can field this query, things are far from lost. "So, Unreal TV. I'm sorry, Hollywood, but internet TV is the new sexy. It's super responsive, small budgets, huge mobility, easily Netflixed when that time comes, and it's totally made for our central characters. I mean, they're coming to our reality from the kinky gray areas of the internet porn industry anyway." Gabe, momentarily troubled by the mention of porn, nonetheless breathes easier at the mention of no-budget internet TV. Mina looks inquiringly from Gabe to Lance, and this time they gesture together to please proceed. "Okay, Season 1. Mac and the Edge here arrive in L.A., trying to leave their shady pasts behind. The usual cast of dream weavers descend upon them, all promising film work while attempting to feed them to the L.A. porn machine. There'll be flashbacks to their porny prior lives. Around minute 6, let's say, in the pilot episode, they'll meet a devious and well-connected young lady utterly at home where they are anything but. She plays poor, and they all live together in a single-bedroom flat for a while. Our muscular edge works in a local garage, comes home irresistibly grimed and greasy. There's been a kind of sexual ceasefire in effect between the new arrivals, but little Miss Devious sends all that into a tailspin. Before long, they're fucking like rabbits in that little one-room flat. Gabe Weingarten has begun massaging his forehead. Michaela is stretching and flexing first her legs, then her back and shoulders. It's a luxuriant display that looks like restlessness, but also evokes the big cat biding her time between chases on the Serengeti plain. Mina rushes to describe how the protagonists navigate the perils of the big bad city, how they approach but ultimately avoid the point of strangling each other. She takes a breath, then launches back in, beginning with her eyes on Lance. A guardian angel appears, equal parts agent, benefactor, and smitten fan of Max. He agrees with Miss Devious about a story being there for the taking. He brings in the writer. This guy's a complete mess of another sort. One creatively, psychologically stewing son of a gun, this guy. But he can appreciate the little group for the veritable petri dish it represents. She looks meaningfully at Manfred Meekness, but he makes no reply, audible or visible. Free will, you know, and the ultimate sham of it. The eternal primacy of perversity. Humanity on its road to extinction. Desire forever in the driver's seat. Reason its unwilling passenger. Mr. Meekness, help me out here. You've read your Dostoevsky. A little story to help our characters shine. You know, human condition stuff. Lance fears they will all now suffer a verbal savaging. What comes of teasing a starved and mangy literary lion? But Meekness is beginning to smile, gradually and craggily, but unmistakably smiling. Well, it sounds like you've written the book to me. Now, the powers that be may take us to task for that. Mr. Weingarten here, for one, is not in the book business. Lance is amazed. Meekness has just said us. He's apparently warmed to something in Mina, her ebullient irreverence, perhaps. Then again, the powers that be may be at our beck and call, if you look at the process the right way. There is affection in the glance Meekness throws Ruth Ann just then. She reciprocates, discreetly covering his hand with her own a moment later. I recall a short film, screened in a small space, back in my relative youth. Its auteur had seen fit to provide us with a brief preface. If I still have the gist of it, it involved the superiority of a passionate, wilderness mind over the cold heart of ambition, however well cultivated. Gabe Weingarten's expression of surprise gives way to amazement. He's impressed, but stops himself short of laughing outright with the pleasure. It may be that we have here, in present company, the makings of a passionate wilderness stew. Woe betide those out to exploit our trio of heroes. I see it proving a costly misjudgment, possibly a battle or two won, but ending in a rout for the good guys. Oh, Edgy! Michaela is wide awake and almost out of her seat with excitement. The whole exchange of energies thing, taking the aggressor's force and using it to throw him. An excellent analogy. All we need to do, put you bumpkins in harm's way, and we should have the makings of a script. Surefire magic, given a little finesse. Gabe Weingarten is grinning at Meekness, while shrugging on his light leather jacket and pushing his chair out back from the table. Well, I sense an exciting project beginning to gel here. Time for me to move to my 4:30, though. but I am eager to hear how things come along. Ms. Weingarten, if you're agreeable, maybe we can meet on a schedule for updates. I believe your agent has my contact." With this, Weingarten gives Lance a thin smile and a shake of the head. Lance returns him a more jovial parting look as they clasp hands and Weingarten makes haste. The others relax into less formal conversations. A minute later, Lance receives another text. "What was that?" "Always nice to see my daughter, but that was not a pitch." Lance smiles, resists replying, reviews instead the animated faces of his motley crew, settling on Mina's defiantly innocent moo. "What? Hey, you said it was my gig. I was just using my connections. Okay, maybe one or two of yours, too, but 6 degrees of separation. Jeez." Chapter 96. Before leaving Pearls, Lance agrees to a follow-up drinks date with Meekness and Ruth Ann, a reunion of sorts. Back in Venice, early in the evening, Lance meets them at a newly opened basement bar, dark and chic, but fairly generic. Meekness wears a contented expression that tells Lance he's already been filling his liver's quota. Hastily consuming a cursory carafe of red ordered on Lance's arrival, Meekness pronounces the basement chic unsuitable to their needs, so they move on. A nearby outdoor patio proves more hospitable. It's tucked in behind a spaghetti house, canyoned there by pink cinder block walls half covered in some leafy and flowering vine. Midway through their pitcher of sangria, Ruth Ann is first to transcend the small talk. "Manfred, when do you think you can drop all the film and TV work? It's taking all your energy. Can't you get back to another book soon?" Meekness pauses minutely before lifting his gaze from the pitcher of sangria on the table. There is no hint of offense taken in his voice when he replies. "That is not a question new to me. I ask it myself, quite frequently." Lance swallows a sigh of relief and chases it with a quiet sip of sangria. "Sorry to be so direct, but Manfred, I've been waiting to read a new Meekness title for most of the 20 years I've been away. That's a long time. Do I need to find myself a new literary hero? We're none of us around here forever, are we?" "No pressure, I presume." Manfred is pinched by an irritating memory. His last book making it across the publisher's desk. With his new editor, there'd been little of the spirited wrangling his first work had occasioned. Very soon after, the mid-sized publisher succumbed to a fiscal throttling. Manfred's book, The Blind Bleeding the Blind, hadn't made it out of galleys. It was passed along to a lower mid-sized publisher as a matter of courtesy. Initial print run was not drastically reduced, but without much marketing, sales had disappointed. A minor outburst of cheer from a nearby table fills the pause in their conversation. Lance chimes in as the volume drops again. "You know, Ruth Ann, filmmaking is a highly revered calling in these parts. Some would call it an art form in itself, and put it on the same exalted plane as the writing of poetry and novels. But even the genuine auteur filmmaker is still creating by committee, isn't he? Not to mention the vast majority of his inferiors, the ones making dross, dreamt up by imitators chasing the entertainment dollar of the idle-minded. I'm sorry, I've just a horror of literary genius wasted." "Watch out, Manfred. She sounds serious, not unlike you on similar subjects." An instant later, Meekness is standing upright and steely-eyed. He thrusts his brimming glass out for a toast without spilling a drop.
Let us mourn in advance the gory demise of a great American medium. And I don't mean me. The death of cinema. Lance gamely raises his own glass and tips it back in unison with meekness. Ruth Ann merely snorts as others at tables within earshot jovially echo the toast. What was brimming now is drained and again is refilled, and the pitchers replenished not long after. Conversation turns to the future, the dot-coms boom and bust, the longest reasonable expectations of survival for the American empire. Harkening back 20 years, Lance recognizes a meekness already sped beyond his tippling point, well through the zone from which he'd deliver his master's classes in eloquent inebriation. At present, the meekness voice remains easy on the ear. Typically, his blood's alcohol content meeting his brain's exacting specifications, meekness would undergo a serotonin-fueled intellectual serendipity. You could read it in his face and hear it in his voice. He'd become expansive, reveal himself endearingly, then extrapolate from self to gild more universal truths. He spoke fluently, in complete sentences, conforming to some elegant internal rhythm. The result would render even argumentative listeners compliant. What impressed most was the air of detachment meekness could maintain while savaging any poorly considered opinion. Though passionately engaged, he never let his detractors feel they were in a fight, always ending his points with invitations to rebuttal. He might have 2 or 3 good hours in him, depending on the caliber of his interlocutors. After that, the citadel of his companions' minds, encircled and taken by force of wit, could yield only bitter spoils for meekness. The conqueror was rendered joyless as the booze overran his enthusiasm. New arrivals have replaced their nearest neighbors on the terrace. There are 3 women, 2 young professionals not long finished work for the day, and 1 dressed to party. 2 men accompany them, 1 perhaps a workmate. The other meekness hails as they are taking their seats. The guy is Australian, in his late 20s, sun-bleached dreadlocks. Lean and buff, he's sparingly clothed in sleeveless spandex, neon board shorts, and flip-flops.
"Pardon the interruption, man, but are you a surfer by any chance?"
The Aussie has been playfully holding forth to his companions while they entered and seated themselves. As they settle in, he remains standing to reply.
"No, mate. Why do you ask?"
"You have the look. I mean nothing by it, but oblige me if you would, between strangers, just for the hell of it. What is your line, then?" The younger man checks his companion's expressions briefly. Replying, he takes his seat, leaning back slightly with a comfortable air and an amiable expression.
"I jump bikes, mate. I ride supercross and do the bigger freestyle events."
"Ah, extreme sports, then. You're an extreme sportsman. We were talking earlier on, my friends here and I, about the absence of heroes these days. You make a good buck jumping bikes, can you? Risk and reward line up okay, do they?"
"I do good, mate. Lots of sponsors helps."
He indicates the well-logoed front of his shirt, but not with any effort to make it legible. Meekness appeals to Lance and Ruth Ann.
"This young man has sponsors, and fans aplenty, I'll warrant. He's living dangerously, and he's well remunerated. I submit to you, it's he that's inherited the hero's mantle. The proposition includes his accepting the heavy responsibility of living, for us all, our own extreme dreams."
Here, Meekness makes a little bow to the neighbor's table,
not exactly dismissing them, but effectively relieving the athlete from any obligation to reply. It has the desired effect, and the fellow gives an amused chuckle and half raises his hand, a celebrity's gesture of acknowledgement. Meekness addresses Lance and Ruth Ann once more.
When I began writing, it was because I found the way humans related to each other so baffling. I needed to think about it, and writing helped me think. As time passed, and I felt I'd understood something of what transpires between us, I was heartened to find people responding to what I wrote. It was only after that point that I gave a thought to the high regard in which society holds the author, and the thought was a troubling one.
The speech has been delivered with meekness, simultaneously searching the crowd for their waitress and the sangria. "When are you going to write another book, Manfred?" Ruth Ann's imperious tone distracts the professional athlete at the next table. He ogles her openly.
"I'm afraid my views on the muse have not softened since our last conversation on the subject. If she hasn't taken a turn to the perverse and begun commissioning works, perhaps," one of the office girls shrieks with glee. "Phineas, you're such a dog! I have a wolfish appetite for the finer members of the opposite sex. Resemblance ends there. I'm not a dog." "No, you're a dog. You're discerning when it comes to choosing the finest motor oil for your bikes. When it's women, you're on American soil all of 2 hours here? One of which he spent sleeping in the limo. Sleeping and bird dogging. Nice work if you can get it, huh? Okay, guys, he's just had a long flight. Fair dinkum, business class, slept like a babe."
Lance and Ruth Ann are smiling, casually eavesdropping. Meekness catches a distant server's eye with expert efficiency. While concentrated upon acquiring more booze, he's maintained the writerly alcoholic's attention to detail in his drinking companions. He notes, for example, Ruth Ann's distraction from the subject of his writing. His attention no longer divided by the necessity of ordering more plonk, he revises his earlier theme. "Our conquering hero can only really hope to please the informed and, maybe, the most envious watching from the wings. And yet, appeased the rest of us should be. He is, after all, living our dreams, providing us the inestimable benefit of his shining example." "Jesus Jankers, mate, that's more the Queen's English than I've heard since leaving me loves down under." Meekness raises his empty glass amicably by way of reply.
"But this hero of the people bit, not sure it fits, mate. I've more of the court jester in me. More of the court jester than any of your conquering hero stuff." "Now that I have to doubt. As a word man, surely I have a better claim to amusing the court."
"Oh, I don't know. Our Phineas here does party tricks."
"Party tricks? Impossible. This paragon of manhood?"
A moment later, the motorsports professional has adopted a yogic headstand on the brickwork between their tables. Time has passed. The dusk of evening, tiki torches flickering around the perimeter of the seating, give the place a slightly festive air. The Aussie removes the hands he's clasped behind his head, lifts his elbows from the ground, and casually crosses his arms over his chest. He crosses his legs at the ankles for good measure, adopting the look of someone casually waiting for a bus, standing against an invisible wall, upside down. The party girl and the male office worker both applaud, as do Lance, Ruth Ann, Meekness, and several others. Meekness whistles between his teeth for good measure. After 10 seconds, standing motionless on his head, no hands, the hero of Australia resumes the upright carriage common to the rest of humanity. Lance has watched closely Ruth Ann's reactions to the approaching drunkenness of Manfred Meekness. To this point, she's shown no concern whatever. Now they concur in one meaningful look, pick up the tab, and orchestrate their departure in one smooth motion. Meekness, trailing along dutifully, if without enthusiasm, tips his face into the hero's ear en route. In a poorly affected Aussie drawl, he offers to get Ruth Ann's number for him.